"Stay here all winter," said the rancher. She replied, "Should we share the bed?" The wind howled across the snowy plains, rattling the windows of the small ranch cabin. The trees bent under the weight of the snow, and the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of more winter storms. Inside the cabin, the rancher moved with calm efficiency, his hands rough and skilled from years of hard work. He had lived alone for a long time, used to silence and the rhythm of the land. The snowstorm outside didn't bother him. He had seen worse, but today, something was different. He noticed a shadow moving through the snow, a figure stumbling against the fierce wind. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, or perhaps an animal. But as the figure came closer, he could see her clearly. A young woman, bundled in clothes that offered little protection against the cold, was struggling across the snow-covered ground. Her hair was damp from the snow, her face red and chapped from the wind. She looked tired, weak, and frightened. Without a second thought, the rancher stepped outside. The cold cut through his coat, biting at his skin, but he didn't care. "Hey," he called, his voice firm but not unkind. "You shouldn't be out here in this storm." The woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide and wary. For a moment she didn't speak, as if unsure whether he was a threat or a savior. I didn't mean to," she started, shivering uncontrollably. "I was trying to reach the next town, but the snow—" "It's too strong." Her voice was soft, almost breaking under the weight of fear and cold. The rancher could see the truth in her eyes. She was exhausted, and she needed help immediately. "Come with me," he said simply, stepping closer to guide her. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, trusting him even though she barely knew him. He wrapped his large coat around her shoulders, and together they made their way to the cabin. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and the wind threatened to knock them off their feet, but the rancher moved steadily, careful to keep her safe. When they finally reached the cabin, he opened the door and ushered her inside. The warmth hit her immediately, a sharp contrast to the cold that had pierced her bones. She took a deep breath, feeling the chill slowly leave her body. The rancher closed the door behind her and hung her coat by the entryway. His movements were efficient, showing a lifetime of experience living in isolation and managing a harsh environment. "Sit by the fire," he instructed, pointing to a small wood stove that crackled and glowed with orange light. The woman obeyed, grateful for the warmth. She was shivering, her teeth chattering, and the rancher quickly fetched a blanket for her. He draped it over her shoulders, and she looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "You live here alone?" she asked, her voice still shaky. "Mostly," he replied, moving to stoke the fire. "It's quiet, peaceful. Storms like this, they're not unusual out here, but you don't belong in them." His eyes softened for a moment, a rare glimpse of concern breaking through his usual calm demeanor. She smiled weakly, feeling a strange sense of safety in his presence. There was something about him that felt solid, reliable, like the land itself. For a long moment, they just watched the fire, the storm raging outside, and the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a pause, a moment of understanding that sometimes words weren't needed to communicate trust. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The roads are closed, and the town is miles away. I don't know what I'll do if I can't get through." The rancher studied her for a moment, considering the situation. He had lived his entire life on this land, and he knew that the storm wasn't going to let up anytime soon. He could send her back into the snow, but that would be dangerous, possibly fatal. He could see that she was exhausted, cold, and scared. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he didn't want to leave her to face the storm alone. "Stay here all winter if you need," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "You'll be safe here, warm-fed. There's room enough, and I can make sure you're taken care of until the storm passes." The woman blinked, taken aback by his generosity. It wasn't every day that someone offered such kindness without expecting anything in return. She hesitated, unsure if she could accept. She had always been independent, used to solving her own problems, but this situation was beyond her control. The thought of staying here, in a strange man's cabin, was both comforting and frightening. "Are you sure?" she asked cautiously, studying him. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," he said firmly. "The ranch is big enough. The cabin's warm. I have food. You won't be alone, and you won't be in danger." There was no pressure in his voice, just an honest offer. She could see that he meant every word. After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay, I'll stay," she said quietly. Relief washed over her, mingled with a hint of nervous excitement. She didn't know what the winter would bring, but for the first time in days, she felt safe. The rancher nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Good. Let's get you settled then. You'll need dry clothes, and I'll start some soup. You must be starving." She followed him to a small bedroom, simple but comfortable, and changed into warmer clothing he had provided. The cabin was modest with basic furnishings, but it radiated warmth and care. The fire crackled in the background, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. The rancher moved with quiet efficiency, setting up her sleeping area, stacking blankets, and making sure she had everything she needed. As the evening wore on, they shared a simple meal of soup and bread by the fire. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin there was a sense of safety and calm. They talked quietly, sharing small stories about their lives, the rancher's days tending the land, and the woman's journey to this remote place. There was laughter, though soft and tentative, breaking through the tension of the storm. Despite the warmth and comfort, an awkward tension lingered between them. They were strangers, yet the storm had forced them into close quarters. They were learning about each other slowly, the air filled with a strange mix of curiosity, gratitude, and something unspoken. An unspoken awareness that this winter might change their lives in ways neither of them expected. As night fell, the wind howled louder outside. Snow piled against the cabin walls, and the cold pressed against every window. The woman, now feeling safe and warm, curled up with the blankets, feeling a little anxious about the night ahead. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, but here, in this remote cabin, with the storm raging outside, she had no choice. The rancher checked on her before heading to his own room. He paused at the door, looking back at her, noticing the vulnerability in her posture. There was something in the way she looked at him, grateful, cautious, curious, that made him feel a strange sense of protectiveness. He had spent so many years alone, relying only on himself. Yet this woman, stranded by chance, had brought warmth into the cold cabin. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "It's going to be a long night, but you'll be safe."
"Thank you," she replied quietly, her voice tinged with relief and exhaustion.
The rancher nodded and went to his room, leaving the door slightly ajar so she could see the firelight. The storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin there was warmth, safety, and the beginning of an unexpected connection. Neither of them knew what the coming winter would bring, but for now, they had found a moment of trust, a small refuge from the cold, and a sense that perhaps this winter wouldn't be as lonely as they had feared. Outside, the wind continued to scream and the snow piled higher, but inside the cabin, two strangers were learning to coexist, to trust, and to face the long winter together. And as they settled in for the night, a quiet understanding passed between them, a silent promise that they would weather the storm, not alone, but together. The morning after the storm, sunlight struggled to break through the heavy clouds. The snow outside glittered like a field of diamonds, and the wind had finally calmed, leaving the world quiet and white. Inside the cabin, the rancher was already awake, tending to the fire before the chill of the morning could reach the wooden walls. The warmth spread quickly, and the smell of fresh wood smoke filled the small space. The woman stirred under the blankets, rubbing her eyes and taking in the room. She felt rested, though her body still ached from the cold and the long trek through the storm. The rancher noticed her movement and offered a small, reassuring nod. "Good morning," he said simply. "Sleep well?" Yes," she replied, her voice soft, still adjusting to being awake in a strange place. "Thank you for letting me stay. I didn't expect anyone to be so kind."
The rancher shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Out here,
You learn to look out for each other.
Not everyone survives alone in this weather. You'll get used to it. She smiled faintly, feeling a strange comfort in his words. There was a steadiness about him that made her feel safe, and for the first time since she had been stranded, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal, bread, and coffee. The rancher moved with practiced ease, pouring her a hot cup and setting a plate before her. They ate quietly at first, the sound of snow crunching outside the cabin the only interruption. But slowly, conversation began to flow, small and careful. "Where were you heading before the storm?" he asked casually, though his eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. "I was going to visit a friend in the next town," she explained, stirring her oatmeal. "I thought I could make it before the snow got worse, but—" I miscalculated. Her cheeks colored slightly at her misjudgment, and she laughed softly at herself. "You're lucky you ran into me then," he said dryly, though there was warmth behind his tone. "Out here, a storm like that can be dangerous. People don't always survive being stranded in the snow for long." She nodded, taking his words seriously. "I know. I can't believe I underestimated it." Her gaze drifted to the window, watching the snow-covered landscape outside. The world looked peaceful, almost magical, but she knew how unforgiving it could be. After breakfast, the rancher showed her around the cabin in the small area of the ranch that was accessible despite the snow. He explained the daily routines: feeding the animals, chopping wood, checking the fences, and made it clear that she could help if she wanted. At first, she hesitated, feeling awkward and out of place in this unfamiliar environment. But he encouraged her gently, never pushing, always patient. "Try this," he said, handing her a bundle of firewood. "It's not heavy. Just stack it by the stove." She took the wood, fumbling slightly at first, but soon found a rhythm. The rancher watched quietly, occasionally offering tips, his presence calm and steady. There was something grounding about him, a quiet strength that made her feel capable even when she doubted herself. As the day wore on, they moved outside to check on the animals. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and the cold air stung their cheeks. The woman admired the way the rancher worked, every movement purposeful, every task done with care. He had an intimate knowledge of the land and animals, and he moved with confidence that only came from years of experience. "Do you do this all year?" she asked, her voice carrying over the soft wind. He nodded. "Every year. Snow, rain, heat, it doesn't matter. You learn to adapt, or you don't survive. This ranch has been in my family for generations." She smiled, impressed by his dedication. "It's beautiful, even covered in snow." He looked around, taking in the white landscape. "It has its moments," he admitted, "but it's not for everyone. Most people leave after a few weeks of winter. Too cold, too lonely."
I don't mind the cold," she said quietly. "And I've been alone before."
"I can handle it." She caught herself and laughed softly, feeling a little embarrassed at her own stubbornness. The rancher smiled faintly, a small acknowledgement of her words. "We'll see how long that lasts," he said, teasing, though not unkindly. "Winter can change your mind pretty quickly." As the days passed, they settled into a routine. The woman helped with feeding the animals, cleaning the barn, and chopping wood. The rancher taught her how to handle the tasks safely and efficiently, but never with impatience. Mistakes were met with gentle correction, not frustration. Slowly, she began to feel capable, even confident, in her new surroundings. There were moments of tension, of course. Living in close quarters with another person was not easy, especially when both were used to independence. Small disagreements arose over how to store firewood, the best way to feed the animals, or how to manage chores. But they were brief, and usually ended with quiet laughter or understanding. One evening after a long day of work, they sat by the fire together, exhausted but satisfied. The woman stretched, letting out a small groan. "I never thought chopping wood could be such a workout," she said, smiling at him. "You'll get used to it," he replied, smiling faintly. "And you'll be strong by the end of winter. Stronger than you think." David talked about it. She laughed softly, feeling a warmth in her chest that had little to do with the fire. There was a rhythm to this life, a simplicity that made her feel grounded, and in the quiet moments, she noticed the rancher's subtle care. The way he made sure her blanket was warm, the way he prepared meals with thoughtfulness, the way he never left her alone in the cold. One particularly cold night, the storm returned, heavier than before. Snow pounded against the roof, and the wind rattled the windows. The woman shivered as she watched it from the safety of the cabin. "You'll need extra blankets tonight," the rancher said, noticing her unease. "The wind will keep you cold if you're not careful." She looked at him, hesitating for a moment, then asked softly, almost teasingly, "Should we share the bed?" The words were half joking, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. The rancher paused, caught slightly off guard by her boldness. He studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and warmth in his eyes. "If it keeps you warm, I don't see why not," he replied carefully, keeping his tone light. That night, they shared the small bed, not out of desire but out of necessity. They kept a respectful distance, but the simple act of sharing space created a new level of trust and comfort between them. The storm raged outside, but inside, the cabin felt safe and cozy. Over the next few days, their bond deepened naturally. There was humor in their interactions, accidental brushes of hands while stacking firewood, playful teasing over spilled coffee, or disagreements about the best way to clear snow. There was also quiet understanding, a shared rhythm that developed without words. The rancher noticed her strength, her determination, and her ability to adapt. She noticed his patience, his quiet confidence, and his reliability. Together they began to rely on each other in small but meaningful ways, from daily chores to preparing for snowstorms. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the barn, the woman slipped on the ice. The rancher caught her quickly, holding her steady against him. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment words weren't necessary. The shared glance, the simple act of being there for each other spoke volumes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with genuine emotion. He nodded, his hand lingering slightly before letting go. "You do the same for me," he said simply. It was in these small moments, these acts of care and connection, that they began to understand each other. They were learning to live together, to trust, and to appreciate the simple joys of companionship in a harsh, snowy world. The days turned into weeks, and winter showed no signs of easing. Yet inside the cabin, life became predictable in a comforting way. There was work to do, yes, but also warmth, laughter, and companionship. And each night as the fire burned low and the snow fell outside, they found themselves a little closer, a little more connected, and a little more aware of the bond forming between them.
By the end of the second week, the woman felt like she had been part of the ranch for much longer than she had.
The rancher, too, noticed a change in himself. The quiet presence of someone who trusted him, who relied on him, and who shared small, meaningful moments of humor and care was something he hadn't realized he had been missing. One night as they sat by the fire sipping coffee and listening to the wind outside, she leaned back and smiled at him.
"I never imagined winter could be like this," she said softly. "I thought it would be lonely and cold. But it's not. Not with you here."
He looked at her, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Winter has a way of teaching patience and endurance," he said quietly, "and sometimes it brings people together who otherwise would never meet." She nodded, her smile warm, and for the first time they both felt a sense of peace. They were learning, slowly, how to coexist, how to trust, and how to face the long winter together. And though the days ahead promised challenges, storms, and hard work, they knew they could rely on each other. Winter was only beginning, but already the bond between them was growing, one built on trust, shared labor, and quiet moments of laughter and understanding. And deep down, both knew that this winter would be remembered for more than snow and cold. It would be remembered for the unexpected companionship, the growing trust, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name, but both quietly cherished. The weeks passed, and the winter deepened. Snow blanketed the ranch so completely that the world outside seemed distant, quiet, and almost magical. Inside the cabin, life had settled into a rhythm, but it was no longer just about chores and survival. There was a deeper connection forming between the rancher and the woman, a quiet understanding that neither had expected. One morning, the woman awoke to the smell of fresh coffee and bread. She stretched and looked around the cabin, noticing how the space had started to feel like home. She had grown comfortable here, not just with the routine, but with the presence of someone who cared for her well-being. The rancher was at the stove, humming softly as he prepared breakfast, a rare smile on his face. "Morning," he said casually, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment. "Sleep well?" "Yes," she replied, taking the warmth from the coffee he handed her. "Thank you for everything. I feel safe here." He nodded, almost silently, but there was an unspoken approval in his gaze. Safety was more than warmth or food. It was trust, and she was beginning to understand that he had earned it naturally. As the day progressed, the storm outside had cleared, leaving a sparkling white landscape. The rancher suggested they take a walk around the property, checking fences and feeding animals. The woman agreed, enjoying the chance to stretch her legs and breathe the crisp, clean air. As they worked together, their conversation drifted to personal topics. She told him about her childhood, her family, and the challenges she had faced. She spoke quietly, hesitating at first, but the rancher listened without interrupting, his calm presence making it easier for her to open up. I've always had to be independent," she admitted, her breath visible in the cold air.
I thought I could handle anything on my own.
"But being here, with you, I feel like I can let my guard down a little." The rancher glanced at her, noticing the vulnerability in her eyes. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't always have to be strong. Not here, not with me. Winter can be harsh, but it also teaches you to rely on the right people. That's part of surviving it." His words lingered in her mind as they moved about the ranch. She realized that she had never met anyone like him, someone so steady, patient, and quietly protective without ever demanding anything in return. It made her feel a mix of admiration and comfort she hadn't expected. That evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered hills, they sat by the fire, the cabin filled with a gentle warmth. The storm outside had returned, snow drifting against the windows. But inside, there was a sense of peace. The rancher handed her a cup of tea, and they sipped quietly, the firelight reflecting in their eyes. "I've never stayed in one place this long during winter," she said softly, watching the flames. "It's different than I expected. Less lonely somehow." "That's the thing about winter," he said, his voice low and steady. "It can be harsh, but it can also bring people closer. Sometimes you find someone you'd never expect to meet, and suddenly, you're not alone anymore." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. She felt a warmth beyond the firelight, a connection she could neither fully understand nor resist.
The next day brought its own challenges.
A section of the barn roof had collapsed under the weight of the snow, threatening the livestock inside. They worked together tirelessly, moving planks, shoveling snow, and securing the animals. The physical work was exhausting, but it also created a sense of partnership that words alone could not capture. At one point, the woman slipped on an icy patch while carrying a plank. The rancher caught her quickly, steadying her against his chest. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched longer than necessary. Neither spoke at first, the air charged with unspoken emotion. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice soft. "Yes," she whispered, her heart racing. "Thanks to you." He nodded, his grip gentle but firm, letting her go with a small, reassuring smile. The incident, though minor, had brought a new level of intimacy between them. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about trust, care, and the subtle thrill of closeness. That night they shared the bedroom again, not out of necessity, but because the storm made it difficult to sleep elsewhere. This time the air felt different, lighter, warmer, yet charged with a tension neither of them could ignore. She teased lightly, trying to break the quiet.
Do you think we'll survive winter like this without driving each other crazy?
"I think we'll manage," he replied, a hint of humor in his voice.
You're stronger than you think, and I'm used to winter. Together, we'll be fine." The following week, the storm eased, but their lives were far from simple. They spent their days feeding animals, repairing fences, and clearing snow. Their movements almost synchronized. In quiet moments, they shared stories about their pasts, dreams, and fears. The rancher revealed glimpses of a life filled with solitude, the losses he had endured, and the lessons he had learned. She, in turn, shared memories of her own struggles, her hopes, and the reason she had been traveling when the storm struck. Each revelation deepened their understanding of one another. They laughed at small mistakes, shared warmth by the fire, and found comfort in simple gestures, offering a blanket, preparing a warm drink, or standing close to share body heat during cold chores. One particularly harsh night, the woman became ill. Shivering violently despite layers of blankets, the rancher didn't hesitate. He brought her hot water, prepared a light meal, and stayed by her side through the night. His patience and care were unwavering, and she realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just for survival, but for emotional support. "Why you're being so kind?" she asked softly, looking at him with wide, tired eyes. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Winter teaches you who matters. You matter tonight." Her heart warmed at his words, a mix of gratitude, admiration, and something she could not yet name. She realized that this winter, which had begun as a challenge, was slowly transforming into a time of unexpected closeness and understanding. As the days grew colder, they found more reasons to stay close. They worked together in the barn, their hands occasionally brushing as they lifted heavy sacks or moved planks. Small jokes and teasing became frequent, a way to break tension and share light moments. There was a playfulness to their interactions now, a natural chemistry that made the long winter nights feel less daunting. One evening, after finishing their chores, they sat together by the fire. The woman looked at him, her voice soft but direct. "I've never felt this connected to anyone before. It's strange, but nice." The rancher nodded, meeting her gaze. "It's strange for me, too. I've been alone for so long. I didn't expect someone to change that. But you have." For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the wind outside and the crackling fire between them. Words were not needed. The quiet understanding and mutual respect were enough. Winter had shown them hardships, tested their patience, and forced them to rely on each other in ways they had never imagined. But it had also created moments of tenderness, trust, and a subtle intimacy that could not be ignored. Each challenge they faced together, from blizzards to physical labor, had strengthened the bond between them, creating a foundation of care, understanding, and mutual admiration. By the end of Part 3, both realized that winter was no longer just a season of survival. It had become a season of growth, emotional, personal, and shared. The harshness of the weather had pushed them closer, and the warmth of their growing connection made the cold outside almost bearable. They had learned to trust each other, rely on each other, and find joy in small moments of companionship. As they prepared for yet another snowy night, the woman looked at the rancher, a faint smile playing on her lips.
"I never imagined I could feel this
"Calm, this safe, in the middle of winter," she said quietly. He met her gaze, his expression softening. "It's easier when you're not facing it alone," he replied. The firelight flickered across the room, casting shadows that danced on the walls, but the warmth between them was real, steady, and undeniable. Winter still lay ahead, with its challenges and hardships, but they had discovered something stronger than the cold: trust, companionship, and the beginnings of a bond that neither had expected, yet both quietly cherished. And in that quiet cabin, amidst the endless snow and howling wind outside, they both knew that the harshest season of the year had also become the most meaningful, teaching them lessons of patience, care, and the subtle power of human connection. The snow had begun to fall again, heavier than before. The world outside was a blur of white, and the wind whipped across the open fields with a fierce intensity. The rancher and the woman stood together at the cabin door, surveying the ranch. Snowdrifts had piled high against the fences, and the roof of the barn was burdened with an alarming weight. The livestock were safe for now, but their daily routines would require extra care and effort. "This storm looks worse than the last," the woman said, her voice tense but calm. She had grown stronger, more capable, in the weeks she had stayed at the ranch. She now moved with confidence, carrying firewood and tending to the animals alongside the rancher. "It is," he admitted, tightening his scarf. "We'll have to work together to keep everything under control. The animals come first." Without hesitation, they stepped into the snow, boots crunching against the frozen ground. Their movements were coordinated, almost instinctive now. After weeks of working side by side, they had learned each other's rhythms, when to lift, when to pass, when to cover each other's backs. There was trust in their actions, a silent understanding that made even the hardest work feel manageable. As they cleared the snow from the barn roof, a particularly heavy plank shifted under the weight. The woman froze for a moment, unsure if she could move it alone. The rancher was immediately at her side, steadying the plank and guiding her hands. "You've got this," he said firmly, his calm voice cutting through her momentary panic. "I'm right here." She nodded, and together they managed to secure the plank. Standing side by side, covered in snow and sweat, they exchanged a brief glance. There was exhaustion in their eyes, but also a spark of something deeper, a shared accomplishment, a recognition of the bond that had grown between them. Inside the barn, the animals shifted nervously, sensing the storm outside. The woman moved quickly to reassure them, her hands steady and gentle. The rancher watched her, impressed by her newfound confidence. She had come to the ranch fragile and uncertain, but now she was capable, resilient, and calm in the face of challenges. As the storm continued, the day stretched into evening. They returned to the cabin, cold and tired, but satisfied with their efforts. The fire was already burning brightly, the warmth enveloping them as soon as they stepped inside. The woman shed her wet coat, and the rancher handed her a towel, his eyes lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Good work today," he said quietly. "You handled yourself well in the storm." "Thanks," she replied, smiling despite the chill still lingering on her skin. "I couldn't have done it without you." They settled by the fire, sipping hot drinks and letting their muscles relax. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin there was a sense of safety and accomplishment. They had faced the harshness of winter together, and it had only strengthened their connection. As the night wore on, the woman looked at the rancher, her voice soft but playful. "You know, I never imagined winter could be so intense. But somehow, it's been better than I expected." He smiled faintly, his eyes meeting hers. "Better?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "In what way?" She laughed lightly, a sound that warmed the cabin almost as much as the fire. "Because I wasn't alone. I had someone I could rely on. Someone who didn't just survive with me, but helped me feel like I belonged." The rancher's expression softened. "I've been alone for a long time," he admitted quietly. "I didn't expect anyone to change that. But you've made this winter different. Easier, somehow. Better." The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Both felt the weight of their words, the meaning behind them. It was not just companionship. They had grown to care deeply for one another, their bond strengthened by shared hardships and quiet moments of trust. Later that night, the storm outside intensified, snow drifts piling high against the cabin walls. They shared the small bedroom again, not out of necessity but because the wind made sleep elsewhere uncomfortable. This time, there was no teasing, only the quiet closeness of two people who trusted each other completely. They adjusted the blankets and settled into their respective sides of the bed, each aware of the warmth and safety provided by the other's presence. "I never thought sharing space could feel comforting," the woman said softly, breaking the quiet. "Neither did I," the rancher admitted. "But it does, doesn't it?" She nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude and affection. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of the wind outside and the gentle crackle of the fire. In the stillness, they found a peace that had been absent in both of their lives before the storm had brought them together. Over the next few days, the storm passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Snow glistened under the pale winter sun, and the air was crisp and clean. The ranch was safe, the animals cared for, and the cabin stood strong against the harshness of the season. But something had changed between them. The winter had tested their strength, patience, and resilience, and through it all they had discovered a bond that went beyond mere survival. They continued their daily routines, but now there was an ease to their interactions, a playfulness and intimacy that had grown naturally. Small gestures, a touch of the hand while moving firewood, a shared smile while feeding the animals, a quiet laugh over spilled coffee, spoke volumes about their growing closeness. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the barn, the woman tripped on a patch of ice. The rancher caught her immediately, steadying her against him. Their eyes met, and the unspoken connection between them deepened. "You're steady," she said softly, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You've become strong," he replied, his tone quiet but sincere. "Stronger than I expected." The compliment made her blush, and she looked away, smiling faintly. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge the feelings that had been building between them throughout the long winter. It was not just gratitude or trust, it was something deeper, something neither had fully named, but both recognized. Evenings were now filled with conversation, laughter, and shared stories. They talked about dreams for the future, about hopes, fears, and lessons learned from life. The woman admitted she had never felt such trust and comfort with anyone, and the rancher confessed that her presence had brought warmth and joy into a life that had once been cold and solitary. As the weeks passed and the snow slowly began to melt, they prepared for the end of winter. There was work to do, repairing fences, clearing the last of the snow, and ensuring the animals were ready for spring. But the tasks were lighter now, filled with companionship and mutual support. The hardships of winter had forged a connection that was unshakable. One evening, after finishing their chores, they sat by the fire, the cabin glowing with warmth. The woman looked at him, a gentle smile on her face.
"I can't believe how much I've changed this winter," she said. "Not just because of the work, but because of you.
You've shown me patience, care, and trust. You've made me feel safe in ways I didn't know I needed." The rancher's eyes softened, and he reached out to gently touch her hand. "And you've shown me something I didn't expect," he said quietly. "That life doesn't have to be solitary. That sharing even the harshest moments with someone can make them better. I care about you." More than I realized at first. Her heart swelled at his words, and she squeezed his hand, a mix of relief, happiness, and quiet joy flooding through her. "I care about you too," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't expect this winter to bring this, but I'm glad it did." They sat together, hands intertwined, watching the firelight dance across the walls. The storm was over, the winter beginning to fade, but the warmth between them was stronger than ever. It was no longer just about surviving the cold. It was about companionship, trust, and love that had grown naturally over weeks of shared experiences. That night they shared the bedroom once more, this time with no awkwardness or hesitation. They adjusted the blankets, making sure both were comfortable, and settled in close, their presence a comfort against the fading chill. The woman whispered softly, "I never thought winter could feel like this, warm and safe and full of life." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's because you never faced it alone," he said. "And we never will, not again." Outside, the snow continued to glisten in the moonlight, silent and serene. Inside the cabin, two hearts had grown closer, strengthened by the challenges and hardships of winter. They had discovered not just survival, but connection, trust, and the quiet, steadfast power of companionship. By the time spring approached and the snow began to melt, the ranch was transformed, not just by the changing season, but by the bond that had formed between the rancher and the woman. They had faced the harshest months together, supported each other, and discovered a love that had quietly, steadily grown in the warmth of the cabin and the heart of the winter. And as the last patches of snow disappeared, leaving the fields ready for spring,
They knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger, happier, and forever changed by the winter that had brought them together.